Star Wars did that, Indiana Jones, everybody did that in the future, but when they were doing it here, it's impressive.
Cinematic fantastic.
Batu, Barada, Nikto.
I'll show you who I am and what I am.
By a werewolf and lives, becomes a werewolf himself.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to the Cinematic Fantastic Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Weatherford.
And your other host, William Weatherford.
Get ready for opinions, dad jokes,
and bad jokes
as we watch and review sci-fi and fantasy films from the classics of yesteryear to the new favorites of today.
If you wanted something to do in between seasons,
when you're missing us dearly and life feels uneven,
we'll stop on by and give you a lift. Brought you a present.
You brought you a gift.
This is a bonus episode, little bit different from the ones you know.
4 theme movies in a row. Welcome to the bonus. Thankful that you joined us. Now here's the bonus episode. All right. Welcome to Cinematic Fantastic Cinematic Classics.
Yes, this is our bonus month, guys.
Going through 4 movies. This is the second in our series of amazing things.
Last time, we did M by Fritz Lang. That one was really good. I've remembered that movie. Every time I see it, it sticks with me. If you could say anything about that movie, it's that it kind of lodges itself in your brain. But if you're really interested, or if you missed last episode, you really missed out. You really need to listen to that one.
I mean, you've got the time.
Yeah, and your brain is going to say Dunkashane to you, greatly so.
All right, so we watched a movie. Guess what that movie is called? Citizen Kane. It's kind of daunting. It's like approaching, Everest or like Kilimanjaro or something and staring at it like the Celeste poster. A bit daunting coming at, what's considered the greatest movie of all time. But yeah, Citizen Kane is directed by Orson Welles.
It's a 1941 film. Mm-hmm.
1941. And most would not believe it. You could probably, assuming from last episode, if you did listen to that one, you have a girlfriend that's also bilingual, but that doesn't matter for what I'm about to say. You pull the movie on, but before you do, you go, oh, whoops, I messed with the wrong cable, and now there's no color. So there definitely totally is color. It's just not displaying on the screen right now. But let's go watch a movie called Citizen Kane. You put it up right in front of her, and then ask her about it when it came out. She would not be able to say it was 1942 at all. I mean, she could. 41. But she probably could not be able to tell.
It's even blowing your mind. You can't even figure out the year. I'm just kidding. The thing I will say about this movie is a lot of the conventions of cinematography, of music, special effects, optical effects, editing, camera angles, that's cinematography, right? All those things we take for granted as just being Hollywood, the way that people film movies. But those things, this movie didn't invent those things. Those aspects of film were done in other movies prior to this.
But what Orson Welles did is he took all of those elements and he put it into a perfected format. That is probably why we call it the greatest movie of all time, is because it is very great on multiple levels.
The story is good.
But it is very well told.
One thing that I would like to let people know is if they're going, I'm expecting to be blown away by the story. There's, it's just the most amazing story it's ever been.
You're bound not to if you live in the 2000s era.
It's a little bit dry, but the thing is, the things that this movie does, and how it plays with time and the motion of time, it's been used in so many other movies. That convention of telling the story backwards. I mean, you got movies like Memento, and is a modern film.
Yeah, and most people during this time, they'd watch a movie. They'd usually expect it to be linear. Maybe there's the occasional flashback, but this story is entirely non-linear because it's being told from the future. Because, I mean, this was 50 years ago that they talk about stuff.
So, let's just go into it.
First of all, we've been talking about Citizen Kane. You're like, well, what's it actually about? Citizen Kane is a movie about a man. A man's journey through life, his great uprisings, and his greater downfall. A man who presented himself as an advocate for the people, but inwardly was manipulating the world all for power, because he knew not of humble living and lowly stance. Another factor is that the news are trying to encapsulate a man in his life in this story, and they're trying to solve a puzzle made out of biased, old, and unreliable sources. And those all culminate in this, what seems like an epic story. And there's also a great quote by Orson Welles we'll play here. And as he says,
"What's the real truth about Charles Foster Kane?"
We may never be able to know.
It also has the convention in the storytelling of the unreliable narrator. Because in each of these people, they're telling the story, they have their own bias, like you said, they have their own way that they view Charles Foster Kane.
And a lot of the people here are old as well. They're very old, so they're bound to not have, a unbiased, absolute remembering of
Yeah, it's not crystal clear. And sometimes emotion can cloud memory as well. It's how there's a lot of emotion wrapped up in how these individuals in the story relate to Mr. Kane and how they see him and why he did what he did. And honestly, it uses the convention of, here I use that word again, use the convention of this word that Charles Foster Kane says as he's dying. Rosebud. And it becomes the mystery that everybody's trying to figure out. But ultimately, it's just something to move the story along or to give the story a reason. But it's the portrait of a man from different people's perspectives. If you didn't know who this story was about, if you weren't during that time, you can definitely relate to, I think, the character of Charles Foster Kane. He's similar to a lot of politicians, rich people, celebrities. The former president of the United States was a wealthy celebrity. So how can you not relate to some of that? And we've got people like Michael Jackson who when he was alive had a place called the Neverland Ranch, which was kind of a giant. It was almost like a modern day Xanadu, and what you'll find out what Xanadu is when you listen to our podcast now. But if you've seen the movie, you'll understand. It does look quite. If you're old enough or young enough to remember Michael Jackson and his Neverland Ranch, if you look at it, you'd be like, wow, that's very similar to what Charles Foster Kane was doing with Xanadu. And
there was also a particular point that there was another very, very, very accurate, inspiration for Charles Foster Kane as well.
Yeah, a famous media baron, big in journalism, and he also kind of dabbled in politics. His name was William Randolph Hearst. If most people don't know who that is, if you were in the 40s, you definitely know who that guy was.
This guy, he did the newspapers just like Citizen Kane. He had a castle just like Citizen Kane.
It was called San Simeon.
He had a girlfriend just like Citizen Kane.
There's some differences between the mistress or girlfriend character as played by Dorothy Comingore.
Dorothy Comingore is a name I'm going to repeat. Dorothy Comingore. I won't have to repeat it much longer. You'll be repeating it.
She played Susan Alexander, right? There's differences between her and the mistress girlfriend of William Randolph Hearst. There's differences.
But another inspiration that seems to uproot is that, of Orson Welles as well. He seems to have put a lot of his character into. And Orson Welles is the director.
How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? This is Orson Welles.
Of the movie.
Producer, director.
And the producer, the director, the co-writer.
Co-wrote the screenplay. He was in every part of it, just about.
And he starred the main character, Citizen Kane. And he put a lot of himself into the character, which a lot of things I noticed. And as we'll talk about, the production history, which Dad is going to do, I might bring some of the moments that seem to relate a lot to the movie Citizen Kane and Orson Welles. I feel like that's interesting fact. But another thing Indeed, people are wondering, we said the greatest movie of all time. Now, let's debunk that, Dad.
Well, here's the thing. I don't like it when someone says something is the greatest, because I've had people even ask me questions. I had somebody ask me, who do you think is the greatest, 5 greatest wrestlers of all time? And I couldn't do it because there were so many different, it's trying to say, what's the greatest food that's ever been created? What's the greatest book that's ever been created? What's the greatest film? I can't do that. I can only say one of. I can say one of the greatest.
Because there's a lot of great movies, and it's all especially up to some opinion as well. But, I mean, there's, The Godfather. You might think that's really great. You might like The Wizard of Oz. You think that's really great. What else? King Kong and Pinocchio. Those are all really great. 2001: Space Odyssey. Jaws. There's all sorts of good...
A lot of those are on these lists, but American Film Institute, they are widely recognized in their field. They have a list called 100 Years, 100 Movies. They update that every so often as new movies come out that should be on this list. But it's been on the list in the top for the longest time. But I will tell you that when this movie came out, it was not appreciated for what it was, and we'll talk about that soon. So let's go into it. Now, like I said, it was a critical success. I mean, people did, the ones that did write reviews of it that were not in any of William Randolph Hearst's newspapers. That is, they did, give it high marks. But it did not recoup its costs at the box office. Later on, in this podcast, we'll talk about the original budget. I think it was $500,000, and he went $300,000 over budget. It was like 800 something over in total. But there are certain scenes that if he had spent what they told him to spend, it would have been okay. But because he spent a little bit extra on certain scenes, like one scene is the scene at the very beginning, when there's a lot of journalists that are in a smoky room with the way the lighting is, which is just really cool looking. That one went from $500 to $800, and I was like, yes, do that scene. It's better for it. Let's see. There's so many top lists that Citizen Kane is on. Now, is it just for the acting or the screenplay? Although it's been nominated for many of the different things that are cinematography, music, editing, it's been nominated for all those things for Academy Awards. I think it only won one.
It only won the script one.
Yes, and deservedly so. But I will say that it was a conspiracy, I think. On the part of it's how much control this Hearst guy had. It has to be. So let's talk about one word that's been used for this movie, and it's a lot of movies and a lot of paintings, and a lot of different things. You'll hear this word bandied about, but masterpiece. Okay, so what is masterpiece? Okay, any great work of art, but originally referred to a work that an apprentice would present before becoming the member of a guild. A piece of work that displayed the full command of their skill over their art.
And with Orson Welles, this was indeed.
I would have to agree, because the reason why it's a full showing of the art, that this is a masterpiece, is it Orson Welles' masterpiece? I think it's a collaborative effort. A lot of people would say, oh, it was all Orson. No, it was a collaborative effort. It's just that he knew what he wanted to do, and he didn't want anybody to tell him what he couldn't do, and he didn't know what he couldn't do.
Because he was new to this. This was his first film.
What I'd like to know is, where did you get the confidence from to make a film with such...
Ignorance. Sheer ignorance. There's no confidence to equal it. It's only when you know something about a profession, I think, that you're timid or careful.
How does this ignorance show itself?
I thought you could do anything with a camera that the eye could do or the imagination could do. And if you come up from the bottom in the film business, you're taught all the things that the cameraman doesn't want to attempt for fear he will be criticized for having failed.
Yes.
And in this case, I had a cameraman who didn't care if he was criticized if he failed, and I didn't know that there were things you couldn't do. So anything I could think up in my dreams, I attempted to photograph.
And he was just like, okay, what can we do? He even said this was the greatest This was like giving a train set to a little boy. That's how much he was like.
He said that's what Hollywood felt like to
Hollywood
him.
feels like a electric train set where you can just make it do anything. You're like, ooh, hoo, hoo, because you're a little boy.
But it's interesting when we get to plot, we'll talk about this. But it's interesting that he compares it to a little boy with a toy. Interesting, because of the very first scenes of Citizen Kane. When it goes to the flashback to Charles Foster Kane as a little boy, what is he doing but playing?
That's a stretch, I believe, but I feel like he's saying that because it's the overall, you get a glee. Like if you get a Christmas present and it's like a train set and you're a little boy, and it's like if it's like a Thomas the Tank Engine, you got that, and it's just like, oh man, what I'm gonna do is good stuff with this.
When you were a kid, you pretended and played, and there was no limits because your imagination just was. You didn't have to wait and say, well, we can't do this and we can't do that. It just is. When your imagination let you be a knight on a horse and galloping, even though you were on a broomstick.
Especially since he had a contract with RoccoW saying, we're not going to meddle with your movie. You get the final say on the cuts. You get the final say on all of this. You get to do what you want to do, boo.
You do you, boo. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he was just like, I want to do this, and that's not really conventional, bro. Oh, but I want to do this, man. I'm gonna do this. So that's what he did, and that's why this movie is just so unconventionally great, because he had full freedom over it, and I don't know if there's been any has there been other instances of that much freedom given toward a movie?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Thank you for bringing that up. Thank you for bringing that up, because one thing that later on in Orson Welles' life that he said that I think that the whole thing about film, it was simultaneously the greatest thing he had ever done and simultaneously the biggest burden on him, because he was given all that freedom and he did everything he could, but it wasn't appreciated, I think, at the time for what it was, because it had elements that could be attributed to, hey, you're making this movie about this fictional character, but there's elements of it.
Of this real character.
Of this real person that's got all this power, this real life power that can hold your career in the palm of his hand.
And you're making him look like a clown, basically, yeah.
You're exposing a lot of what this person was. And I think that that's part of the issue is that, as we'll see, Hearst kept this movie from being talked about or reviewed. I was talking to William earlier about cancel culture. I won't go into that too deeply, but all it takes is a group of people to start a campaign of hatred against you as an actor or your movie or whatever, and they can sink it if you don't watch it.
But I'm really glad that he got that creative freedom to be able to do the things he wanted on the screen to where it could be good. Oftentimes in the movies, especially with his later career, there's a lot of corporate meddling, and unless you go indie, what's there to do? Your creative vision is being messed up. What if you're working with EA and they're just like, hey, can we put microtransactions in your game?
It's in the game.
And I'm like, well, no, I don't really want that.
Challenge everything.
I want my creative vision, but you still want that, corporate giving you resources to be able to do things. And then otherwise, it's like, you got to disconnect with them to get your vision. But would you want to sacrifice all those resources by EA, for instance? So, again, this was never done again, but that probably was a contributing factor to why this is, a very great movie, is because of his creative freedom, where there hasn't really been any other time in history.
Honestly, I don't mean to focus on one or two people in the cast above all others. We will probably not see a lot of these actors again, because of the kind of the genre that we're doing. We might, and it's kind of interesting. We may see some other visiting people, like people that we recognize from early on here. A lot of the cast were members of the Mercury Theater on radio, as well as
theater, actually.
Theater, exactly.
But that's what Orson Welles was the leader of.
This is Orson Welles. I'm speaking for the Mercury Theater.
Yes, he started it.
So most of the actors in this movie were part of the Mercury Theater and were also new, which is very interesting.
There was one character that one actor here that had been in a lot of a good handful of other movies, and that's just the waiter. The waiter in the restaurant, whatever the what do we call it?
Actually, it's the El Rancho.
So he was kind of like, it was kind of one of those moments where, if you were to ask Orson Welles what did he wish, and he wished he had another actor to play that waiter, just because he wanted people that were completely new to all this, and he was like, okay, yeah, it's one of those things. He's a perfectionist at heart. So it's kind of where it's like, okay, you gotta let that go.
So that's where you also get another of that factor of why it's a really great movie, is because he's a perfectionist. He's making this his best movie. He told the story really well, and there's just absolutely many factors of which are very innovative and very well done.
I will tell you this right now. One of the top things that I think about when I think about Citizen Kane is not necessarily the acting, because Orson Welles is great in it.
I mean, he was on radio in the Mercury Theater, so...
He was like 19, 20 years old, man. He already had that baritone voice. I know that your voice has some depth to it, but his voice was like, I'm Charles, I'm Orson Welles.
I'm Charles Foster Kane.
Yeah, he had that voice. And he directed this film at 25. One of the greatest films ever made. He directed it at 25.
And it was his first movie.
His first out. How do you follow that up?
So a lot of people think of him as a legend for that.
Yeah, my first try out of the gate, and it was one of the greatest films ever made. But anyway, back to this. So I will tell you, most, if not all, of everybody was from Mercury Theater, on stage or radio. Dorothy Comingore was not. She plays Susan Alexander, Charles Foster Kane's second wife. She was actually introduced to Orson Welles at a gala or benefit or like a get-together or something. And I think that Charlie Chaplin, the famous comedian, silent film actor, a lot of his films are on YouTube, by the way, William, and he's a comic genius. He really is. He introduced Dorothy to him and said, "This you got to work with her." She did stuff. She actually did stuff before this. She did some silent films. She was a very talented person. Wait a second. I think I'm getting her. You know what? I'm getting her mixed up with Marion Davies, who is the silent film actress who actually was the mistress. But actually, they had some very similarities in how that they came up. It's very interesting. These characters are getting intertwined.
Yeah, so you're intertwining Susan Alexander Kane and Marion Davies.
And Dorothy Comingore, too.
And Dorothy Comingore.
She had some similarities. But anyway.
That's easy to make a mistake.
Yeah. So let's do it's a bird's eye zip through news on the march, as it were, of Orson Welles' life. One thing I found was interesting is there's a connection with Orson Welles and Herbert George Wells, H.G. Wells, who wrote the book War of the Worlds, which has a connection to him.
Oh yeah, because he did the infamous radio special, The War of the Worlds.
Orson Welles' name is George Orson Welles. So he's a George Wells too, which is interesting. I found that interesting. That's just me. So he was born in 1915. His mother died of hepatitis when he was very young. So interestingly enough, his mother was taken from him, but of course it was by death and not by the circumstances that Charles Foster Kane had. His father traveled with him quite a bit. So because this is even when he was young, he was getting exposed to cultures and peoples from all over the world. He was getting cultured. He wasn't just this American guy who only understood how America works. He saw other places as well. There's a biographer, Frank Brady. He said, during the 3 years that Orson lived with his father, some observers wondered who took care of whom, because his father was alcoholic, frequently drunk. The older brother of Orson Welles was institutionalized. His name was Richard. So he didn't have him there, and so he was kind of all by himself. So in a way, he got a lot more of the focus in some ways. He didn't really have a chance to be a young child, just like Charles Foster Kane didn't have a chance to really play all that much. Once he was taken away from his mother, if you watch the movie, you'll see, his childhood was gone, and that's kind of a part of this puzzle that you put together in watching the movie. So he went to a school called the Todd Seminary for Boys. It was an independent school. He gained his love for the arts there, poetry, plays, radio performance. They had their own radio station there, and that's where he's kind of got his voice in doing that. And that's where it all started. They even did simplified Shakespeare plays. Orson Welles is famous for his Shakespeare productions that he both acted in and also directed.
He did direct Othello, right?
Oh, he acted in Othello.
Oh, he acted in Othello.
I think he did actually wear blackface kind of thing, so which a lot of actors did. So hey, to play Othello, I think nowadays you have if they have an actor play Othello, I think there was a movie version where Lawrence Fishburne played him, and he's a black man. So they would not do that nowadays, but back in the day, that's just what you did. So his father died, and it was during a time he died of heart and kidney failure when he's 58. So he did not have a father, and he got a guardian. Just exactly like Charles Foster Kane did.
He did base it a lot of, William Randolph Hearst off himself. There's just a ton of sources.
Yeah, but the guardianship thing with the Mr. Thatcher character, it's just very interesting. Maurice Bernstein was a family friend, and that became his guardian. He was awarded scholarships, and he could have gone to anything, but he traveled. He traveled across Europe. He actually, did almost like how people do nowadays with doing a backpacking trip across Europe. He was on a donkey cart going across Europe, and he went into Ireland, went into Dublin, and he saw that they were putting on a play, and they wanted auditions. He came and said, and this is something about Orson Welles, is he's very famously a showman, a storyteller. So he's going to tell a few fibs now and again about himself. He said, I'm a Broadway star, and my name is Orson Welles, and I want to be in your play. And they auditioned, and they went, okay. So he did. he just would travel across Europe, and he just decided to be in a play for weeks.
But he did get onto the Mercury Theater stuff as well.
He did.
In this era.
What he did is he went to London, and he couldn't get a work permit, so he went back to. That's what caused him to go back to America, and because he did that, that's where he started working in radio and stage dramas. So he worked as a radio actor with many other actors who would actually form the core of the Mercury Theater. Now, early on, he actually did work and produce plays and produce theater. He did one with a man he met called John Houseman, who actually helped him start the Mercury Theater. John Houseman was the director of the Negro Theater Unit in New York, and there was a thing called a Federal Theater Project, and it actually used money from the WPA, which was Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, I think. It was the New Deal. It was trying to get us out of the Depression. They spent money, and they spent money into the arts. So basically, in this Negro Theater Project, they were, and Wells actually took his paycheck from that and funneled it back into the projects that he was working on. So basically, they paid him, and then he put the money right back in the project. So he said it was like a reverse siphoning of money back into it.
So but it's just like you, I just take it out, put it back in.
There was a famous adaptation he did of William Shakespeare's Macbeth with an entirely African-American cast, which had not been seen up to that time. And he did it as if it was on a Haitian island, with voodoo. In Macbeth, you have the three witches, and they're doing sorcery. But this one, they made him, voodoo priests.
Something wicked this way comes.
Something wicked this way comes. Yeah. Yeah, they changed it to a kind of a mythical island. The nickname of it is Voodoo Macbeth because of that.
Yeah.
He also did some other plays. There was another one that he did called Caesar. Julius. It was his version of Julius Caesar. And he used these lights and shadow in such a way. You see where I'm going with this? The lights and the shadow that he used, he did it based upon some things he saw in Nazism and fascist imagery. And it caught the eye of a man named Greg Toland, who later came in and said that he saw something in his use of light and shadow that it inspired him to really seek him out.
Oh, and that was the dude who was the cinematographer on this movie.
Oh, he's amazing.
He got a lot of that. He was like, let's do the stuff with the shadows. I think there was a Stagecoach did a little bit of that or something.
Stagecoach is what Orson Welles watched and to learn. He learned a lot about what he thought filmmaking was from Stagecoach, but Greg Toland, after they had met, and this was after RoccoW, he taught him everything that he knew, and he goes like, well, the reason why we do this is that and the other.
And then he went like, nah.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, Stagecoach is what Orson Welles thought, was the language of film. But Greg Toland kind of taught him fresh, how we do that. And honestly, I think the movie is what it is in a lot of ways to Greg Toland. We'll go into that. One of the things that got people interested, he did Caesar Under the Mercury Theater. Thank you. One of the things that got people interested was there was a very famous incident. Remember we mentioned at the beginning the War of the Worlds. Well, he did a radio version of War of the Worlds, but he did it in such a way that
people thought it was actually real.
Yes, it was a Halloween episode of the radio series Mercury Theater on the Air, and it was October 30th, 1938. It was 2 or 3 years before the movie would come out. The movie Citizen Kane would come out. So what they did is he started out. I've heard it, by the way. He starts it out and goes, "This is a production of the Mercury Theater of the Air of War of the Worlds. I'm Orson Welles, da-da-da-da." And then later on into it, he says something like he's starting kind of as a journalist that's a radio news person that's reporting what's going on. But then he stops, and it goes right back into this music. So a lot of what happened was, and then the music would get interrupted by somebody saying, we have word that in Grover's Mill, New Jersey, there is some strange goings on. We take you now to such and such person on the scene.
Pick off! The top flew! Look out there! Stand back!
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. Wait a minute. Someone calling someone or something, I can see, turning out of that black hole, two luminous discs. The eyes, it might be a face, might be almost but heavens, something wriggling out of the shadow like a gray snake. Now it's another one, and another one, and another one. They look like tentacles to me. I can see the thing's body now. It's large as a bear. It glistens like wet leather, but face, ladies and gentlemen, it's indescribable. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it. It's so awful. The eyes are black and they gleam like a serpent. The mouth is kind of V-shaped with saliva dripping from its rimless lips. It seems to, quiver, pulsate, and the monster or whatever it is can hardly move. It seems weighed down by possibly gravity or something. The thing's rising up now, and the crowd falls back. It seems plenty. The most extraordinary experience, ladies and gentlemen. I can't find words.
So the realism of how the radio would normally go in a normal cycle versus this doing, and no one heard the actual intro where they're saying this is Orson Welles' War of the Worlds.
Yeah.
They thought it was real, and they're all like, there are aliens around,
Yeah, but
getting the police on it and such and such.
But here's the thing. The thing I always heard was that people, had shotguns and they were outside, running around going, and the cops were called and the switchboard operators were going crazy. The thing is that really the case? Because you can actually look at the phone calls that came through and the amount of those and how many cops were called out. And your thought process is, was it really as bad as they say? Or was it overblown?
Overall, people weren't really excited about it at all. It was not really great. It spread throughout the world and stuff.
I thought it was good.
It says here in your notes that Adolf Hitler mentioned it?
Yes.
That's funny, because, we get a character, Charles Foster Kane, interacting with Adolf Hitler, which is kind of funny.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I think happened is, see, the word spread of the effect of this radio broadcast.
Oh, and this is where RoccoW went, we see this man looking like he'd be really good to do a movie, and they drawed him in and went, okay, sign a contract, you get all this freedom, go do your thing, man. We want to see what you got. You look like you're very capable. And that's what he did.
They wanted him to do 2 motion pictures. And really, the guy that really wanted him really, really bad was RoccoW Radio Pictures president George Schaefer. Now, the thing is, this was the greatest contract offered to a filmmaker. And we've talked about how
there was not really any instance of any time where they gave so much freedom to a person to do creative stuff while under the backing of a higher up company, because there's often, corporate meddling in order to, maybe we add this so we get money, maybe we do this to save some money, maybe we do all this for the purpose of was such and such.
Well, the people from RoccoW were not allowed to be on set, but that didn't stop them from trying to spy on...
Oh yeah, there was a story where it's like he told RoccoW that they were doing test shots for Citizen Kane and stuff.
Yes.
And then they got through like half the film, basically, I think.
Yes.
And then they finally got a guy from RoccoW to spy on them and go, oh, God, my goodness, they've done like half the whole film already. And we thought they were doing test shots.
Yeah, what about playing softball? There was a part where some of the guys actually got on set and they were like, okay. And all the actors got together on the back lot and started playing softball.
So that they would think that they're not actually working,
well,
but they were.
Yeah, or till the people would get bored and go away.
It's like whistling after.
Yeah. Yeah, but the thing is, though, this was a big gamble. His first two movie proposals they rejected, but they agreed on the third. I think the title of it was going to be called The American. That's what the early drafts actually call it, but eventually it would be called Citizen Kane, which is what we're talking about today.
Yeah, it's a movie about a guy who happens to be, American. An American guy.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just thought of that one during this recording. I just had to.
My American guy.
Got the honey and the dunny and the whatever. Why?
That's not how it goes.
So bye, Miss American Pie. Drove my Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry. And then
I don't quite remember.
It's a song called American Pie.
I know.
My, this here American guy. So he conceived the project with a screenwriter named Herman J. Mankiewicz, who was writing radio plays for the Campbell Playhouse, which actually, the Mercury Theater on the Air got taken over by this other guy named Campbell, who was kind of muscling his way in. So that's where they had a connection.
And this is a big contention in the Wellesian, fan base, where they're like, okay, who is the actual one who wrote Citizen Kane? Because there was a lot of tussling back and forth over credit, where it's like, hey, who wrote the actual movie? Because Orson Welles pulled ahead in a bunch of moments, and like Mankiewicz was also doing some stuff. So it's like, it was honestly fairly co-written. I guess overall it seems that Orson Welles, lined it up into bombasticness while Mankiewicz was doing other stuff. But he was all like trying to take the credit.
Mankiewicz was funny.
He's a pretty great guy, but it's like, he wanted...
He had his foibles, okay? He drank a little heavily. He had a car wreck, I think. He crashed into somebody at some point.
But he wanted his credit, and Orson Welles was taking a lot of the stuff. And he was like, this is unfair, I guess. And so there's a lot of contention over who actually wrote Citizen Kane.
A lot of times he was uncredited, but he did work on also The Wizard of Oz.
Ooh.
Follow the yellow brick road. Follow the yellow brick road. Follow the yellow brick road.
Pride of the Yankees is another one. I think that's about Lou Gehrig.
Today, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth.
But a lot of different stuff.
And this was often, a bit weird because they wrote it kind of weirdly. Mankiewicz, wrote his draft, Orson Welles wrote his draft, and Orson Welles combined the both of them, taking things that he liked from both of them. Mainly his stuff, though, probably. So that's where, he pulls ahead and all the stuff.
The controversy in the modern world kind of came in 1971. There was a film critic named Pauline Kael, and she wrote two almost like book-length pieces that would become a book-length essay called Raising Kane.
Yeah.
It appeared in 2 consecutive issues of The New Yorker, and actually she wrote a Citizen Kane book later that year, and she included that as the preface. It's about making the film, but the thing that it's most remembered for is a claim that Orson Welles did not write a single word of the script and stole credit away from Herman J. Mankiewicz. And I think some of those elements are
But
actually...
I mean, he was like, you know what? I'm the one making the picture after all.
Well,
I had to make the decisions. And
yes.
You know what? I used what I wanted from Mankiewicz's, and I kept what I liked of my own draft. That's sort of story.
That's true. But see, the thing that Pauline Kael was getting that from was a secretary named Rita Alexander, I think, or Rita something. She was, remember I had said that Herman J. Mankiewicz had an accident? Well, he was in Victorville, California, which Orson Welles calls it the desert, out in the middle of the desert. But in Victorville, Herman J. Mankiewicz is or just call him Mankiewicz or Mank. Mank is recovering, so he can't type up the script or the screenplay.
So Orson Welles writes it for him, just like Citizen Kane?
No, he's dictating it to Rita Alexander.
Oh.
So Rita Alexander is going, well, he's just pretty much writing the whole script. She sends it off to Orson Welles, and Orson Welles has his own secretary who has a different story, and she says that it was a collaborative thing, but Mankiewicz wrote a lot of exposition, a lot of stuff.
And the Rosebud part as well.
Yes, but you know that the movie, at certain points, moves at a good clip. It does this back and forth editing that's just really well done.
And that was Orson Welles's, he was from radio, and radio is very snappy, if you listen to, like, sports people talking excitedly, it was kind of like that sort of...
And they talked over each other in some ways, and there's some scenes where you see they're talking over each other, and you get some elements...
And that's one of the great things about the movie is the dialogue is just so great, so witty.
It does crackle.
The story is very well done. The makeup is great. The cinematography is great. Just all the things.
Yes. So the thing is, when that came out, a lot of people were... Orson Welles he died in 1985, so he was still alive when that article came out, and he was like... This is not true. And people were like, well, maybe she's right. But the thing is, though, I don't think she was entirely right because there's another director, Peter Bogdanovich, who is actually a disciple of Orson Welles. When he was younger, the cult of Orson. But he says that that's not true because he actually had scripts that Orson wrote, especially of the more of the end sequences, the parts that really, go into the part of Charles Foster Kane's life that doesn't necessarily line up with the William Randolph Hearst kind of connections.
Yeah.
There's a lot more Orson maybe in this than Mankiewicz, but they butted heads over the co-writing of it, and he finally just went, okay, here,
let's put Mankiewicz as the credit.
Yeah.
And then eventually he decided, wait, no, let's just say we co-written it, and that's probably the truest answer you could ever give.
I don't think he was trying to steal credit, but honestly, Raising Cain, the article kind of painted Orson Welles as kind of a megalomaniac, and, that... everybody always said that he was like this boy wonder, that he went from when he was young, he's just this intelligent, brilliant guy. So, of course, he's going to say, I did it all, to kind of, he's kind of self-promoting. Hey, you know what? Wait a minute. Do you remember that there's a scene when William talks about the plot, he's going to talk about this. There's a scene where Charles Foster Kane, Orson Welles playing Charles Foster Kane, he says, we're going to be a great opera star.
We're going to be a great opera star. Are you going to sing at the Metropolitan, Mrs. Kane? We certainly are.
Opera singer. He said, we are. We are? Don't wait a minute. So Susan Alexander is going to do most of the singing, but you're saying we are because...
He's going to take credit for power and stuff.
Well, he's like, I made you what you are, pretty much, that kind of thing. So if you think about it, are there some of those elements in there?
So there was a ton of things happening, butting heads over the script, doing a bunch of things undercover from RoccoW, filming... all the things, and there's also William Randolph Hearst having heard of its production going on, and going, actually, this is offensive toward me, let me try and shut it down.
Yes.
And he was doing all he could to shut down the production. It's just a big race to the finish.
Well, there's enough elements that are similar to William Randolph Hearst that he got really upset by it.
So he was definitely pretty right for feeling those feelings, but... I mean, there's just, it's a big race toward the finish trying to catch up before William Randolph Hearst shut down the production for good. I think Louis B. Mayer, it says, actually came in and was like, how about we, destroy the negatives, destroy all the stuff.
They were trying to pressure them to shelve this movie.
Because he thought it was, spreading lies about William Randolph Hearst, and he's like...
Well, Hearst was pulling Louis B. Mayer's strings. Also, the other thing that William Randolph Hearst could do was he either would talk about you nonstop in a bad way in his newspapers, or
he just didn't
talk about you at all.
He didn't even talk about the movie at all.
Yeah.
Which is what happened. Citizen Kane released, the critics were all like, yeah, this is amazing, definitely really great. Box office, not good, because William Randolph Hearst was trying to bury it. And eventually, the 1950s, it would get a reprisal, and they would finally re-release it again when they went, actually, this is, really, really, really great. Greatest movie all time, whatever.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, after William Randolph Hearst died, I think sometime in maybe the 90s or whatever, they actually did show Citizen Kane at San Simeon, which is interesting because it's like, this movie's about the guy. This guy is Kane. This guy is Hearst. But I think maybe that's them kind of putting it, his estate kind of putting it behind them in a way. I don't know. Now, we talked about the making of this movie, but what were some elements of this movie that were so, I didn't say they invented them, but they popularized them and just did them so well? I would say the cinematography.
Cinematography, definitely. The makeup is absolutely great.
The makeup is great.
I mean, they show a period of 50 plus years, and they have an old Orson Welles, and
he's 25.
He looks so old, and it's so convincing, and he makes all the people, the young people, and then transforms them into old people very convincingly. That's one great thing. You wouldn't even know that they were young, or that they were even the same actor.
It was done by a man named, I think it's Maurice Seidelman, and he's an apprentice. This is a guy who is just learning the craft, and he does that kind of work. And the thing is, though, the way that the motion picture industry is they could not put apprentices' names in the movie saying, oh. And in fact, Orson Welles in an advertisement in a newspaper, he said, I want to give credit to all the people that were part of this, whose names may not be in that, including Mr. Seidelman, the greatest makeup artist who ever lived. And I was just like, hey, But
another one who definitely got credit was Greg Toland, you were saying.
Oh, Greg Toland is amazing.
He's a cinematographer. He did lots of good work. There is a lot of good things he did with cinematography. He got his credit right next to Orson Welles' director credit. So he held him very highly.
When you've watched this movie, there are things that you take for granted. Oh, we've seen that a million times in other movies. That's because this one did it best. Not first, but best at the time. It was ahead of its time because of the way it put everything together. It's like seeing, the dramatic. It's like when people saw Star Wars for the first time. All right, so picture this. All right, remember a lot of those. When you watch the movie, you'll see there's a lot of low angle shots. Right. Well, what do you see in the shot? The ceiling.
And often they would not show that because there literally would not be a ceiling.
That's very TV and theater.
But the ceiling is what makes the settings seem extremely realistic, because now that you see a ceiling, you're like, oh, they're actually in a room somewhere. They had to cut the
They used
floor.
muslin. They used a fabric held tight to be the ceiling. If you notice, the ceiling is kind of lower than it normally is in most rooms, except for in Xanadu's giant, castle.
Amazing set.
Yes, and some of that set is, of course, special effects.
He was even trying to make it bigger, but they just couldn't.
The muslin in the ceiling was the mics. So that's the reason why you don't see any microphones, and you get this real naturalistic sound coming out of the room. It sounds like you're in the room with them, hearing all that's going on. You'll note, even if you notice the scene where Orson is very early on, he has the dancers. He's dancing with the dancers, and they're singing a song about how great Charles Foster Kane is.
Yeah.
He doesn't like the mister, he likes good old Charlie Kane.
That ceiling is a lot lower than you normally would expect, and that's because they reuse some of those sets a couple different times, and they move things out.
And plus, if you were literally drilling into the floor to be able to put cameras down there for the low-angle shots, as I just said, then
to the concrete.
They wouldn't really need too much of a ceiling as high as it would be, because the camera would be lower, so it would look normal height, probably.
And the use of shadow.
Especially really great, yeah.
What's in light, what's not?
Especially the library scene.
Oh.
They have the shadows.
Yeah, and also the way that they used pans and wipes.
Especially really great.
They would go for, and also optical printing and matte paintings. Matte paintings. A lot of the effects in this movie are matte paintings.
Because otherwise they'd have to build all that stuff and build Xanadu from a distance. They would never do that.
They didn't have CGI. They used models and matte paintings, and that's it. It's got a lot more special effects than you would realize. There's a scene where Charles Foster Kane is having the famous campaign speech where he's speaking out about Boss Jim Geddes and all this kind of stuff.
With one purpose only, to point out and make public the dishonesty, the downright villainy of Boss Jim W. Geddes' political machine.
And you see out in the audience, a lot of that audience was painted in there, and there's little cracks and crevices where the paint isn't, and they moved lights behind it to make it look like motion of people moving around their seats. They used the techniques that were available to make this movie larger than life, and we have movies now that are larger than life because of that.
This movie seems like a huge, ginormous, like epic, journey that they go across, but really they cut on a lot of things for money, because after all, if you did something that epic, it would not be feasible at all.
The editing is amazing.
Editing is very good, snappy.
Robert Wise was the editor. Of course, he did West Side Story and Sound of Music.
Yeah,
he actually got Academy Awards for Best Director and Best Picture for those. You've seen Sound of Music. We are going to see Orson Welles. We'll wrap this up a little bit if we can. This is a hard one to even scratch the surface of, but we're going to see Orson Welles again in, and this is kind of like, why? It's Transformers the movie from 1986.
What?
This was his last role. He did the voice of
Optimus Prime?
Unicron.
Oh.
Unicron is a planetoid cybernetic organism. So Robert Wise we'll see again in the movies The Day the Earth Stood Still, the Star Trek The Motion Picture you've already seen in 1971. Cool. 1979, sorry. But to be honest, when we talk about that movie, I'm definitely going to mention that some of those scenes needed to have been edited down because they do take a long time to get through. But some people may disagree and think that's what gives the movie the feeling of depth. But there should have been some more editing in that movie. And you said there was also a trailer, and you can we're going to put the trailer, a link to the trailer. It's 5 minutes long, and it has Orson introducing all the actors that are in it. It's quite a long trailer if you think about the trailers that get put out now. They're 2 minutes long.
And very unconventional.
It is unconventional, and actually...
It shows his personality.
Yeah, it shows just as much creative, spice and verve and electricity as the movie does. Yeah, go ahead.
To wrap things up...
Yeah.
So we've talked about Orson Welles in Citizen Kane. Some might possibly ask what happened after Citizen Kane, which is a not so very talked about subject because he was so well known for Citizen Kane. People forget that he's not just Citizen Kane man. So the second movie he made, ooh boy, was The Magnificent Ambersons, 1942.
I haven't seen it.
That was his second movie. The second of the two-movie direct freedom contract. That was actually part of 2 movies. He got 2 movies with that. But it's a little hard to count this one, unfortunately, because let me just tell you. It was adapted from the book by Booth Tarkington about a wealthy family falling from its stature due to the industrialization and motor car industry. His finished rough cut of this movie was 2 hours and 15 minutes, but their test screenings didn't do so well. Part of it being, it's a story with a sad ending originally in World War II, because this is World War II times, 1942. That was World War II start. So they didn't want downer stories at all, RoccoW, and most of the world. So in the middle of the screenings, when those were going on, meanwhile, Orson Welles was sent to Brazil by RoccoW to make an unfinished anthology. Is unfinished. Is called It's All True.
Yes, he did it without payment.
Yeah, and he took a copy of his cut with him to edit because it still needed, the final edit for actually releasing it. But RoccoW, seeing terrible screenings, betrayed him, cut 40 minutes of his work, and burned it, and reshot the last section after Major Amberson's death, to be much happier.
Nowadays when they do deleted scenes, they might put them on the DVD. Oh, they didn't do that back then.
They did not save them. They purposefully burned it.
What they did is they would see it as, well, this is not going in the final movie, so let's get the silver nitrate out of the film.
Burn it, all the negatives
Exactly.
and stuff.
That's why I think that's why it's very difficult to find the negatives for a lot of these films so you can do restorations.
Because a lot of the times they did get sent to silver mines, yeah, but the plot was recobbled into a mess from what Orson Welles originally had. The movie had no depth. It was just about, a squabbling family, but it was much more than that in the original. The score was so jumbled that Bernard Herrmann, the composer, asked to be taken out of the credits. It was so ruined.
He did the music for Citizen Kane.
He did the music for Magnificent Ambersons as well. And if you were asking to be taken out of the credits, then they must have mangled it to an extreme.
There's something we'll talk about as we go, but through these movies. We'll have to watch to see what it's called, the Alan Smithy effect. Have you heard of Alan Smithy?
No.
Alan Smithy is the name that if a director does not want to be associated with his work, he's like, you guys just screwed me out of this picture. It'll say directed by Alan Smithy. So you can actually look up all the movies that say that they were directed by Alan Smithy. This is not a real person at all.
That's funny.
Yeah, it is kind of funny.
At least what people are saying is that Welles' cut was definitely on par, even greater than that of Citizen Kane. But now, with the RoccoW mangled version, it's still one of the best movies of all time. The innovative, really long follow shots were pretty great, but this is one of the holy grails of lost film media. There are some people right now searching Brazilian archives for the cut that Orson Welles took to him for editing while he was doing It's All True in Brazil. Another person is reconstructing the lost footage with pencil and paper. So he's drawing and animating how it was going to go based on the scripts that we have. We have all the scripts of the cutscenes. So if the cut is found when you're listening to this episode, just so you know, I am probably interested in seeing it and comparing it with Citizen Kane and seeing if it is indeed on par or greater than Citizen Kane. But after this, his career was a downfall. There's a bunch of movies that he did do still throughout his career. There was, The Trial. There was S for whatever it was called. F for Fake.
F for Fake?
F for Fake is the name. A lot of people know him for Citizen Kane, but they forget. He's like, oh, I did The Trial as well. I did that. I did F for Fake, I did Lady from Shanghai, see all this stuff. I'm not just Citizen Kane guy, but most people didn't do that. Touch of Evil as well.
I saw Touch of Evil. Do you know Touch of Evil has a really long, it's called a oneer or a one-shot, where they filmed the whole thing in one shot. The whole opening of A Touch of Evil is a oneer. It's a one-shot.
Which is very innovative.
It's hard.
His long shots.
It's hard, because if you mess it up, you got to go and start all over again.
Yeah.
Yeah, so remember I said Alan Smithy with the director thing? Yes. David Lynch directed 1984's Dune, which we'll probably watch when we get to there. It's quite a film. It's a 2-hour-long movie theatrical cut. When they did it for television, they added some scenes and split it into 2 parts so they could show it on 2 nights on TV. And David Lynch said, I disavow myself from this version you've done. I don't want my name on it. And so it says it's called the Alan Smithy cut. So yeah, I know that's a nice little bit of
trivia,
but trivia you didn't ask for. Yay!
So that was Orson Welles' career. His entire career, basically. He died in 1980, whatever.
85.
85.
He had an unfinished movie called The Other Side of the Wind.
And they finished that movie for him by, they see the script and then they did the scenes as they were. But yeah, that was finished. It's on Netflix right now, actually. I don't know if I can watch it. It said it was rated R, so...
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but it's probably not exactly what his vision was, because you can't. How do you do that? So I don't know how I feel about unfinished films anyway. But this movie, Citizen Kane, was finished, and it was, wasn't appreciated, I think, when it came out as much as it is now. But I think after the 50s, it definitely was looked at again as being very influential with modern cinema. Is it the greatest, or is it? I think it is one of the greatest. I let your opinion be what it is, William, but I think it's one of the greatest for many different reasons. I don't think it is the greatest. I don't think I could say which one is greatest. I can't do that.
All right, so that was the production of Citizen Kane, and it was really fun to talk about it with you. And so join us for after the break for a plot retelling by me of Citizen Kane, and we'll explore the plot of Citizen Kane and a lot of the great story that it has there. That I feel
themes,
like.
The
themes are really great too.
The meaning, also some other things we can discuss as we go are similarities to real life characters, real life people that things were based upon. It's super fascinating. I think sometimes the story behind Citizen Kane is often stranger and more interesting than even the movie sometimes. But it's truth is stranger than fiction. There's actually a couple of adaptations of the making of this. There's a movie called RoccoW 281 or something like that, and it's about the making of.
And there's another one called Mank.
Mank, which is about Mankiewicz and kind of it gives his side of the story, which I think honestly it's probably based off of the Pauline Kael article a lot.
But in terms of the backstory, there's a ton of resources. We're even gonna we're linking the trailer already. I'm gonna link the commentary. It's a really great one.
Oh, is it Roger Ebert's commentary?
Yeah.
Yeah, Roger Ebert, he is a famous film critic. Him and Gene Siskel, they popularized, I'm telling this for you, William, because you're kind of young. They popularized the 2 thumbs up or 2 thumbs down, 1 thumb up, the thumbs up thing they popularized. And honestly, I watched them every week. They would talk about movies they went to. We didn't have the internet when I was younger, so you could watch that and see what movies would be good to go watch. And I disagreed with him on certain elements, but by and large, I agreed with him. Roger Ebert did movie criticism for the Chicago Sun, I think. But he's the reason why a lot of us critique movies the way we do. He's an inspiration. We're kind of doing what he did for so many years, and he popularized it. I mean, a lot of people like Leonard Maltin and Schaefer. I think it's another guy named I can't remember his name. It's something Schaefer. But they all did their own reviews. Everybody does reviews, right? Or criticisms of movies. But he popularized it. I think everybody knows the 2 thumbs up. So anyway, that's just my little bit of trivia for that. But yeah.
And this production is Wells at his end. Har har. So we'll catch you for the break, and we'll go into the plot. And for now, I'll say something interesting. Toodles!
News on the march. Who's that giving his idea of the plot? Why, it's William Weatherford, that man about town, that gadabout, that cad.
And all the more an American.
All the more he's an American. This American man, known as William Weatherford, is going to read...
You've heard of American Girl, now you've heard of American Man.
No, he's going to give his idea of the plot, and he's going to let you know exactly what this man, Charles Foster Kane's all about, and this crazy movie that came out years ago, and still considered an amazing achievement in film history. That's about as good as it's going to get.
As you all know, I was the creator of Citizen Kane. That seemed more like a...
As you know, I was the man who created Citizen Kane, and this is my Citizen Kane voice, and I tell you, Jed, this is exactly what America wants, and what America wants, America gets.
Who knows? I could do a good burn. Bane impression.
Yeah, you can do a good Bane impression, but...
So today we're doing Citizen Kane, and I'm about to pull up the baseball field, if you don't mind, Batman.
No, you'd be like, welcome, my name is Citizen Bane. That's terrible. So, yeah, we last time that earlier in the podcast, we were talking about the production, and as I often say, truth is very much stranger than fiction sometimes, and, the story, the making of the movie is often crazier than the movie's plot and the movie's achievements in and of itself, because there's so much stuff that happened, the behind-the-scenes stuff, the controversies, who it was based on, tried to shut him down.
Yeah.
The deal he made with RoccoW. I mean, it's all very interesting. It's so interesting that they made movies about the making of this movie, but that's not what we're going to talk about. We're going to
talk about the actual movie, the actual character.
Yes.
Yeah. Another thing that I was going to say is that, it's really exciting that he finally gets to have a sequel. It's called Kane Dynasty.
There's two options. One, you kill me and destroy all this, and you don't just have one devil, you have an infinite amount.
And he didn't really get to have much of his time to shine from, the end of Loki. So I'm really excited for him to get his shine.
No,
and,
not that guy. Did you think that they needed to call Avengers Citizen Kane?
Exactly.
Actually, I think there actually was a comic book where they chose that name, but they were trying to be really creative. But anyway, so if you were to sum up this plot and you were to do it in like an hour, how would you start? And take it away.
All right. I'll begin us off with a summary of the very first scene. It's very famous. So it's a different kind of movie when you see this, slow close-up crane shot of the no trespassing sign on a chain link fence. Now, this is very much different from what we usually see, because it's like, it's a close-up, it's got a crane, it is a crane shot, and it's moving upwards slowly. There's a little bit of depth with the no trespassing sign.
Cross dissolves.
Some cross dissolves. It's from this first shot, you can tell it's a different kind of movie. That's why I say that, because, you watch all the movies we've been covering from season 1, and then you come back to this, and then it's just a world's difference.
But the fact that it says no trespassing, I've heard some people say that it's almost like it's from, Kane is kind of saying, I don't want you figuring out who I am.
Yeah, and overall, as we figure out from the end of this movie, he's shut himself up in this place. But, so yeah, it's a very different kind of movie, and you can also tell throughout this movie that it's just, it's just oozing with... You would definitely know that Orson Welles knows what he's doing from this movie.
Yes.
He is a very skilled guy, and you can see that from his works and the things that he creates.
Well, this place is abandoned.
It's very ominous. The monkeys that accompany the shot of, right after the shot of this ominous castle, it kind of lightens the mood a little bit, but overall it's very ominous, very understated, sort of quiet.
The music is creepy. It's
the
kind of like
creepy.
Dark castle.
We see, different shots of this place from different angles. We see, there's like a fishing wharf thing with like a couple boats. There's like a little shed with a cat on a chain. I think that either that's extremely dark, or that might be, perspective, or maybe it's a statue on a chain of a cat. But yeah, there is a cat-looking thing, and there is a chain above it, and there's a shed thing as well.
There's no signs of life. It's very abandoned.
It's all very dark gray, which, as you know, it's monochrome, so obviously it's, gray, but it's, well...
But the shadows are very... And the thing that I get on this is, if you think about it, this is a beginning, but it starts with an end.
Exactly. So, as we see the place is all dark gray and misty, we get a close-up sort of this window where a light blinks from it a couple times. We then see a house amid snow, only for a speedy pullout, revealing it's a snow globe that we are looking at. We then see a mustache whispering, "Rosebud." Then the globe falls out of hand. Then we see the nurse come in the door. It's shown with the fisheye lens that it curves the scene into like a circle. That's why I call it a fish eye, because, it's a circular thing. But it seems that we're in the snow globe in this shot, which is really interesting, which is like showing the refraction of the snow globe when we're inside it. So the nurse lays the covers on this dead man as the light blinks out of the window once more, making Xanadu in darkness.
Well, before you do News on the March, I would say one thing. Spoiler alert, at the end of the movie, there's a man named Raymond who said that he was there when Charles Foster Kane had his last word. But in this shot, all you see is the nurse come in. So either that was a mistake or he's lying. He could be lying, but he could have overheard the nurse talking about the last words.
Either way, this is a very, very iconic opening, being parodied a ton of times. There was one time I was watching a show and it got parodied, and I was like, oh my goodness, why did they throw this in there? But it got parodied.
It's the most well-known thing about Citizen Kane is that one scene, and some people have said, reviewers at the time said that, okay, the Rosebud thing is kind of a gimmick to get you to piece together this man's life. But it's
very mysterious and also very, kind of dark and somber, sort of as well.
There's a point to it, but I think that it becomes a gimmick for them to go,
Rosebud, dead or alive.
So, News on the March!
News on the march!
Finally, yes.
This castle is revealed by the narrator to be Xanadu, obviously, which is named after a poem about Kublai Khan, who was a guy who was met by Marco Polo. I think he's related to Genghis Khan, actually, in some sort of way.
He might be a Mongolian or Chinese leader, yeah.
But the first paragraph of this poem is, In Xanadu did Kublai Khan a stately pleasure-dome decree, where Alf, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man. So that fits this a lot, as it's the world's largest private pleasure ground, and it's filled with the loot of the world, and with the biggest zoo since Noah's Ark. So there is a lot of stuff to this glorious place.
It's very pompous.
And we also learn about the owner of this estate, the owner of the biggest property to oneself since the pyramids.
America's Kublai Khan, Charles Foster Kane.
He is the newspaper tycoon. He is a sponsor of democracy, a potent figure of our century. He made the first of grocery stores, and he also owns the Earth's third richest gold mine, the Colorado Lode.
Colorado Lode. That's where a lot of the money, I think, that kind of started this off came from. It's honestly, at its core, that the gold is what really is feeding this the fact that he can afford all this stuff.
It's feeding his life, I do agree. But yeah, that was the character from this first scene. So he dead. We then see a shot of newspapers piling on top of each other, many languages. They're being cycled around, all announcing his death. One person we'd also see is talking about him being a communist, and another right after calls him a fascist. But then Citizen Kane himself says that he is ultimately an American.
You can't. People want to put labels on the guy, but I think Charles Kane is saying only I can label myself. Only I can say what I really am.
And what is an American truly? Is an American, he says he's an American, but is American, full of freedom, courage, integrity, kindness? Or is it more corrupt than it may seem? An American can have, more connotations.
Yes, and to different people. And you can be...
So it's the American way to, cut down all the trees and, turn it all into cities.
Oh, wow. Yikes.
They also tell you his whole story, just right up here, which basically, other than, he got a gold mine, and he has newspaper tycoon. They explain that he married twice. His first wife, he divorced. That wife did die in a car accident.
That was Emily.
That was Emily Kane. So that's the one place where we do know her fate.
She's related to the President of the United States?
Yeah, the President's daughter or niece, my goodness.
Wow.
And so he had a second marriage as well, and due to hanging out with her, this sparked controversy, which stopped his campaign for governor, as they say, And after that, he tried in vain to keep his newspapers in control and his life under control as his business slowly failed. And then he shut himself within Xanadu, and ultimately he died, as we see in the first scene, in its chambers.
Absolutely.
News on the march.
Yep. And this whole little scene is
very tonally different.
It is tonally different, and it's kind of
very surprising.
It's a whiplash, but then it comes back to more of what you expect from the rest of the movie, because these gentlemen, these journalist guys, are watching this News on the March thing.
How about it, Mr. Ralston?
How do you like, boy? Well, 70 years in a man's life.
That's a lot to try to get into a newsreel.
It's a good shot, Thompson, but what it needs is an angle.
Yeah.
All we saw on that screen was that Charles Foster Kane is dead.
I know that. I read the paper.
You see, Thompson, it isn't enough to tell us what a man did. You've got to tell us who he was.
Reviewing it, approving it for news release.
Right, but they want to, like, one of the guys, is his name Thompson?
I think so.
Yeah, Thompson. He's kind of the catalyst for a lot of this, because he said that word rosebud. What does it mean? And then when a person says, "Oh, it could be a racehorse," which, funnily enough,
and why he wanted to know what rosebud meant was because he looked at the newspaper. He was like, "Oh, this isn't really good, actually, because it isn't enough to tell us what a man did. Got to tell us who he was." So they're like, we'll find a way to know who he was. Well, what was his last word? Rosebud. If we figured out that, then we'll know who he was, and then we'll be able to get a better newsreel.
Yeah. Let's put this off for a little bit until we can do the research on this. Let's go talk to people that knew him best, that kind of thing.
So they're gonna find out who he was by knowing what his last word meant. So therefore, if they know what his last word means, they know what he means, what he means as a person. Then we get one of two shots throughout this movie, one, two, or three, of this model nightclub with a big sign. It says El Rancho, and we pan over in between the words El and Rancho, and down. We pan over it, and then into the glass roof, which honestly is an impressive shot.
They kind of covered the dissolve with a little bit of rain and lightning.
And they had miniatures, but who would have ever pulled this off?
Greg Toland would.
In a time where you filmed in interiors. Like, this is things that people would normally do outside with, like, a drone, or, like, I don't know, an abnormally tall crane. But they didn't film this outside.
You mean
they
nowadays?
filmed it in an interior. Yes.
Nowadays they would do it with CGI.
Or they just pan over with a drone. But they didn't have that then. So it's very impressive.
It is. And the thing is that they probably had part of the outside set of the sign where it could, like, pull apart. So they could
slot it in between, because it's a big camera. So
they do a lot of the pull apart things in other scenes too, like that.
But who would have ever pulled off an exterior looking shot in an interior when there was a time when they were restricted to interiors? Just amazing.
They weren't restricted to it. It's just that he was like, let's do something dramatic, and then Greg Toland goes, yeah, we can do that.
What I'm saying is that they couldn't pan over a huge building in an exterior like that.
But the thing is that I really like about it is that it just gets, we watch it and go, oh yeah, because that's modern technique as we use now. We just use more expensively. We use special effects and stuff to do similarly what he does here, and he also saved money by using matte paintings, which is paintings on glass. Now, Star Wars did that, Indiana Jones, everybody did that in the future, but when they were doing it here, it makes it that much more imposing, especially when in some of the outdoor scenes with the castle. It's just really it's impressive. I'm going to say that word a lot.
It is impressive.
It's a transition. I like it. It's very.
So we're transitioning into this nightclub where we see Susan Alexander, which was also on the sign for being known for this nightclub. So she is glassy-eyed, drunk, and in mourning. So basically, the reporter goes up to her and is trying to interview her, but she shuns him. She's like, go away.
Won't you people leave me alone? I'm minding my own business, you mind yours.
I could just have a little talk with you, Miss Alexander.
Get out of here.
Get out! So they then plan with a call in a phone booth to see Kane's biographical info from the Thatcher Library.
Mr. Thatcher was his guardian, which you learn.
So he would definitely put this in his biography.
Yeah.
And they also plan to, after this, they'll interview Bernstein, which was a guy who knew Kane personally because he was with him in the newspaper business. He was Kane's manager. And then they would attempt to interview Susan again, which is basically how this is going to play out. So, we then get to the Thatcher Library, where all the staff of this place are very precious of their archive.
The directors of the Thatcher Memorial Library have asked me to remind you again, Mr. Thompson, of the conditions under which you may inspect certain portions of Mr. Thatcher's unpublished memoirs. Yes, James. I bring him right in.
All I want
Under
to know
no
is...
circumstances are direct quotations from his manuscript to be used by you.
Well, that's all right. I'm just looking for one.
They're keeping it behind an iron safe door, and they're even watching him read the biography and make sure that he's on the specific pages. They really care about this guy.
You have to stop reading at 4:30 or something. She's like, 4:30, that's it. We're going to come and stop you. And you're like, okay.
And there's a statue in this library, so this guy's pretty important.
And the statue is very good because the statue is a miniature, and they are panning down as the other part pans up, and they're coming down to a piece that... So instead of building this big, gigantic, full-size statue, they just did the miniature, and they pan down to the other part. So, and this is a big room, too. It's... The sets are really nice, and,
And also very dark, because as we see, there are shadows upon them when they're in this library room, which is very shadowy, and you would also see these kinds of shadows in, stuff like the Maltese Falcon, very noir-like, where they experimented with this darkness.
Well, a lot of the noir stuff, Citizen Kane kind of was heading that direction with their, with shadow and light. And the thing is that Greg Toland did not like the filming style that was done in the 30s, where although lighting is very flat, they
had to illuminate it a lot for their cameras.
Yes, thank you.
Because the cameras needed a ton of light at the time. Nowadays we have digital, so it doesn't super matter.
Well, you have to do some things, but strangely enough, I wonder how you're going to feel when we go back to, I guess, 1933, 34 for season 2 of our podcast, because you're going to start seeing that flat light again and go, wow, you're really going to tell a difference. I'm pretty sure of that.
Yeah, there is a big difference between, the stuff now and Citizen Kane. That's why we call it, the greatest of all time, is because it was distinct from most other movies of its kind.
Well, a lot of the techniques, though, that you see in this, you also do see in Greg Toland's earlier films. So he was experimenting with this before he met Orson Welles, which I think is, he was like, I want to work with him because we're going to be able to do some good stuff.
Yeah, probably like some stagecoach stuff or whatever. But overall, fantastic movie. 9.5 on the fantastic go meter, I guess. We have a meter now.
Yes, we do. It's canon.
The cinematic fantastic meter, official, copyrighted.
The Fantastico meter. Yeah, I love it.
Anyway, so as he reads the words, I first encountered Kane in 1817. We're transported to a blizzard-like land of snow, and with a boy playing war as the Union, as we pan inside to the parents inside this house, signing a document to give their son away to be raised by Thatcher, by the bank.
It sounds kind of cold if you think about it.
So they're signing a document to give their son away to be raised by Thatcher. The father doesn't want to. He doesn't really understand why the bank has to have him. Honestly, me too, buddy. But the mom gives him up very easily, being the sole owner of the third richest gold mine. The father can't do anything because she owns the Colorado lode. So she ignores him and signs him up anyway. Here's demonstrated the deep focus tech. You can see him playing through the window in as much detail as you can see them signing the document. With also the camera is inside the table, so they had to part the table, by the way.
Exactly. That's what I was referring to earlier.
So
I love those little tricks.
She seems to care nothing for him. Is the overall feeling you get versus, the father actually cares for his well-being. But she seems to only care for the money, basically. So Kane, he goes to meet Mr. Thatcher because she goes, hey, want me to meet Mr. Thatcher? He's going to take care of you, buddy. You're going on a train. And the father's trying to hype him up because, you're going on a train to go somewhere cool. And he's like, yeah, sort of, I guess. But he is sus of Mr. Thatcher. But Mrs. Kane seems to gaslight him into disliking his father because he's saying the word, I'll give you a thrashing if you don't, or whatever. So it's sort of confusing. Is the father the bad one or the mother the bad one? It's hard to tell.
That's the interesting thing.
I wrote this from the mother being bad, but as you're saying, the father could be the bad one as well.
That's the twist. That's the twist on that, is that some people have thought that it's not that she was cold, it's that she had to be cold or she would never let him go. She would be like, I have to let him go for his he's going to have a better life, not here, but with Mr. Thatcher. He's going to be able to be a great man. And if he's here, his dad is going to get his hands on him.
But the dad is like, Kane is like struggling sort of against Mr. Thatcher. He hits him with his sled and he's like, no, boy, don't do that or I'm going to give you a thrashing. And then that's where the mother goes, he's going to give you a thrashing, so he's bad. And so that's very, she's the one that goes up to him and says, well, he's a bad person. So it's like, who is truly the bad person?
You're I'm sorry, Mr. Thatcher. What that kid needs is a good thrashing.
That's what you think, is it, Jim?
Yes.
That's why he's going to be brought up where you can't get at him.
That's interesting. So, the old sled, he abandons his sled as he gets pulled out of this house. It gets abandoned for a Christmas sled, which is given to him by Thatcher. There's also good use of height dominance as well, because he's just, shown from a low angle, giving him this Christmas sled. And he's like, here, it's Christmas time. Sort of a coldish way of doing it. Jumping forward to the Happy New Year by him saying, Merry Christmas, and then it transitions to, and a Happy New Year. So that's a transition to the Happy New Year, which I find really, really clever.
The editing is nice. Thank you to Robert Wise for that editing.
Yes, but this is about his 25th birthday. So this is a very, 15 year transition.
And also, that's also how old Orson Welles was when he made this movie.
Interesting. So Kane is revealing to Thatcher through a letter that he wants to disregard the gold mines and oil rigs,
as well as the assumption by you of full responsibility for the world's 6th largest private fortune. Have you got that?
The world's 6th largest private fortune.
Yes. Charles, I don't think you quite realize the full importance of the position you are to occupy in the world. I am therefore enclosing for your consideration a complete list of your holdings, extensively cross-indexed.
For the newspaper, because that'll be fun. So he's given inheritance.
It'll be fun to run a newspaper.
It'll be fun to run a newspaper.
A little newspaper, I understand we acquired in a foreclosure proceeding. Please don't sell it. I'm coming back to America to take charge. I think it would be fun to run a newspaper. I think it would be fun to run a newspaper.
And he's given all this inheritance to all of the bank and whatever and his own business. But he's like, you know what? I just want the newspaper. Thank you.
Yeah, and Thatcher, he says, I'd be fun to run a newspaper. And he looks at us. So a little bit of a fourth wall break there.
So he doesn't really seem to run it well overall. He's, he's outing capitalist corruption of his and Thatcher's company on the front pages, as we see. And this is called yellow journalism.
That's really your idea of how to run a newspaper?
I don't know how to run a newspaper, Mr. Thatcher. I just try everything I can think of.
Charles, you know perfectly well there's not the slightest proof that this armada's off the Jersey
Hello,
coast.
Mr. Bernstein.
Excuse me, Mr.
Can you
Kane.
prove it isn't?
This just
Mr.
came
Bernstein, I'd like you to meet Mr. Thatcher.
I'll just borrow
How do you do,
it.
Mr. Thatcher?
Leland, Mr. Thatcher, my ex-guardian. We have no secrets from our readers, Mr. Bernstein. Mr. Thatcher is one of our most devoted readers. He knows what's wrong with every copy of the Enquirer since I took over. Read the cable.
Girls delightful in Cuba, stop. Could send you prose poems about scenery, but don't feel right spending your money. Stop. There is no war in Cuba. Signed, Wheeler. Any answer?
Yes, dear Wheeler, you provide the prose poems. I'll provide the war.
So basically, he cares about the people, but is so rich losing money doesn't really matter to him for this yellow journalism.
Charles,
I think I should remind you of a fact that you seem to have forgotten.
Yes.
That you are yourself one of the largest individual
Mr. Thatcher.
stockholders in the public transit company.
The trouble is you don't realize you're talking to two people. As Charles Foster Kane, who owns 82,364 shares of public transit preferred, you see, I do have a general idea of my holdings. I sympathize with you. Charles Foster Kane is a scoundrel. His paper should be run out of town. A committee should be formed to boycott him. You may, if you can form such a committee, put me down for a contribution of $1,000.
My time's
On the
too
other
tight.
hand, I am the publisher of the Inquirer. As such, it's my duty, and I'll let you in on a little secret. It's also my pleasure to see to it that decent, hard-working people in this community aren't robbed blind by a pack of money-mad pirates just because they haven't anybody to look after their interests. I'll let you in on another little secret, Mr. Thatcher. I think I'm the man to do it, you see. I have money and property. If I don't look after the interests of the underprivileged, maybe somebody else will. Maybe somebody without any money or property.
Yes, yes,
And that
yes.
would
Money
be
and
too
property.
bad.
Well, I happened to see your financial statement today, Charles.
Oh, did you?
Now, tell me honestly, my boy, don't you think it's rather unwise to continue this philanthropic enterprise? This Inquirer that's costing you $1 million a year?
You're right, Mr. Thatcher. I did lose $1 million last year. I expect to lose $1 million this year. I expect to lose $1 million next year. You know, Mr. Thatcher, at the rate of $1 million a year, I'll have to close this place in 60 years.
Yeah, and the other part of that is he's exposing corruption, but a lot of these, yeah, you said investors, but a lot of these people, including Thatcher, are kind of the subject of his corruption, him exposing the corruptions, and Thatcher's like, these are the same people that kind of are making you who you are, if you think about it. So you're kind of biting the hand that feeds you.
So it's like, you gotta stop, man. So cut to 1929, which for those who don't know is the stock market crash, interestingly enough, where Kane, he's way older, seeming at least, and he's relinquishing most of the Inquirer to Thatcher & Co. Because he ran out of cash for those sub-companies, so he's selling the sub-companies back to Thatcher & Co., interestingly enough. Basically, it seems from this moment that Kane doesn't really like being rich anymore from relinquishing those sub-companies, I guess. I don't know. So, the reporter has then exited the Thatcher library and is now interviewing Bernstein about the start of the newspaper and of Kane meeting his first wife, which is basically the events that play out. He also mentions his own first love, which is a maid in all white with a parasol.
A fella remember a lot of things you wouldn't think he'd remember. You take me. One day back in 1896, I was crossing over to Jersey on the ferry. And as we pulled out, there was another ferry pulling in. And on it, there was a girl waiting to get on. A white dress she had on. She was carrying a white parasol. I only saw her for 1 second. She didn't see me at all. But I'll bet a month hasn't gone by since that I haven't thought of that girl.
So now we're at the Inquirer, back in the past, where Kane, with no plans, he takes his place as head of the newspaper. It gets very chaotic when Kane is literally moving in to the Inquirer, and the previous owner is just like, to comedic effect.
Kind of funny, yeah.
And so he's just like, he has no plans on what he was ever gonna do, so he's just gonna move in. He's also eating, while he's also explaining that he's trying to imitate the Chronicle by warping housewife gossip into front-page news 24 hours a day, is his basic ideas. It's very comparable to Orson Welles making his first movie and Kane's newness and fun-seeking about this newspaper business. There's a lot of parallels with that, I wanted to know.
Also, I was thinking, you said 24 hours, I kept thinking, this is CNN.
This is CNN.
Because they were the first 24-hour news network that came about in the 80s, and cable news.
But yeah, the guy who previously owned this is just huffing like a toad at his management ideas, man. He's just like, but what on earth are you doing? So later, he shows Leland and Bernstein his declaration of principles, where he promises to be honest and to side with the people, basically.
Got it all written out, Declaration of Principles.
You don't want to make any promises, Mr. Kane, you don't want to keep.
These will be kept. I'll provide the people of this city with a daily paper that will tell all the news honestly. I will also provide
That's the second sentence you've started with I. People are going to know who's responsible. And they're going to get the truth in the Inquirer, quickly and simply and entertainingly, and no special interests are going to be allowed to interfere with that truth. I'll also provide them with a fighting and tireless champion of their rights as citizens and as human beings.
He's also putting this on the front page, where we see, with shots of stacks and stacks and stacks of newspapers, his declaration that he, personally, will provide them all of this.
And there's another newspaper that is their rival,
which is the Chronicle.
The Chronicle, yeah.
So the next scene we see they're doing well off the Inquirer. We also get a funny scene explaining, the Chronicle's staff, it took 20 years to amass. Kane gets them on his own company in 6 years. How funny is that? It's just like they abandoned the Chronicle fast when he was gaining traction.
And the transitions are really cool because it goes from photo to, for them.
Very snappy dialogue overall, very snappy transitions.
This is actually, this whole part from him going into getting the Inquirer till now is my favorite parts of the movie because
this is his good days.
Well, yeah, but I like Orson Welles watching him just with the brightness in his eyes, and he's just as an actor, and he's just being very snappy with his dialogue, and you watch him going, this really is a wonder, this genius wonder boy filmmaker. You can see, his
the excellence.
Yeah, and it's this has never been done. Giving a director this much power, and it really shows because he's able to get his true creative vision out there, and it's a shame that he was never able to do that ever again.
Yeah, but fantastic movie.
I would say, yeah, and you know what? Honestly, there are some people out there that, get pretty much the vision they want out there, and they can say, I've made great films. Citizen Kane being the greatest that Orson Welles has ever done, I would say. What a life. I mean, the greatest movie ever made, I made. That's a very good kind of thing you can say about your life.
Except when it sucks up your entire life and you're like, hey, I made, The Trial, but they know you for Citizen Kane. It's like, oh, Citizen Kane, when you interview him, is like, no, I have this stuff, come see this stuff too.
Yeah, what about the great, about the Ambersons, and they just massacred that, and so honestly, I think it kind of turned him off to Hollywood a great deal. He there's a line that he said later in his life. He said, that he doesn't think he's really cut out for Hollywood because it's 98% hustle and 2% filmmaking. Was it? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So the staff are all having a party. They're celebrating 684,000 papers.
684,132!
Right! Which is pretty funny. They're having a party. It also has very many ice sculptures, which is something you note about. They're all special. So he's blown a lot of money on this.
And a lot of statues. He's blown money on diamonds and statues too, man.
All sorts of stuff. And so he's like chatting with them about, he was going to have a vacation in the plan, but he wasn't going to, and they're like, oh, don't bring back all those statues and whatever. Then he brings out a whole marching band, and there's dozens of woman dancers.
Showgirls.
And he dances with them as they all sing a song all about him. Everyone is very amused, laughing, and singing along. Leland is sus of the Chronicle newcomers, however, but Bernstein reassures him. So he's just like, not only do I have all this stuff, I'm gonna selfishly, make them sing a song all about me.
This is Jedediah Leland. Who is Leland to Kane?
They're sort of, the guys that they worked with in the newspaper.
I think he's the best friend. He's Kane's best friend. He's the only one I think that sees through his nonsense and kind of goes, because everybody else, including Bernstein, is like, hey, happy, joy, and he's like, yeah, but I wonder, are these guys gonna, be loyal to the Chronicle way of doing things, or are they going to do it the way that Charles wants them to?
Yeah, but this is a high point of this movie. And, very sort of cathartic, but also sort of concerning, because, they're singing a song all about how great he is. Anyway, next scene, Leland is sorting through the thousands of statues that he bought on vacation in Europe. And it fills the entire room. When Bernstein, he comes in, he sort of bumps the statue a little bit, which is sort of funny. But Bernstein comes in and tells him that Kane, again being on vacation, has bought the world's biggest diamond for, as we discern when Kane arrives back to New York, and everyone's trying to throw him a surprise welcoming party. He flusteredly announces that he has to leave for the White House to marry the president's niece.
Emily Monroe Norton.
Exactly. So he has bought the world's biggest diamond so that he can propose to the niece and then marry her.
Over the top much, but yeah, Kane's over the top.
Like, my goodness. So there's the wedding that happens, and they're all, like, clustered about. We do see some shots of this in the newspaper on the March segment as well, because after all, that's the same events. So Bernstein, then, after this all being done, redirects the reporter to interview Mr. Leland. He's theorizing that Rosebud was probably something lost.
He says Rosebud is probably not Emily Kane, his first wife.
So he goes to Leland. Leland is at this, retirement home. He also, funnily enough, he wants to sneak cigars past the doctors, which becomes a little bit.
Mr. Leland, you were going to say something about Rosebud.
A good cigar, do you? I've got a young physician here who thinks I'm going to give up smoking.
He also, what we get from Bernstein is that Leland didn't really agree with Kane about the Spanish-American War, so they had some things about that. I think, through the newspapers, he caused it. That applies back to Hearst, because I think Hearst sort of did that with his newspaper, and so they're, parallels.
There's that famous line that I think they took from Hearst or something where he says, you give me the prose poems, I'll give you the war.
Exactly. Anyway, Leland is at this retirement home. He's very old, as well as Bernstein. They're both very old people. So we start from Leland a little forward from where we left off, with a montage of the married couple as they're growing farther and farther apart.
The breakfast table scene.
Yes, they're growing farther and farther apart as Kane spends most all of his day at work, increasingly so. And she's just wondering, why are you staying all this time? And also, funnily enough, the table is getting longer and longer as well. So if you didn't see that, there's definitely a with this cool-looking montage where they whip around and it shows the next part. Really, really cool. You can obviously see that they're growing apart, both in table and both in attitude. As toward the end of this montage, they argue about Kane's attack on the president in the newspaper. And also secondarily about Bernstein coming to see their son in the nursery for all day, basically. And she's like, why was he in there while with my son and stuff? So Kane, he's growing colder and colder as the montage goes on, and they end up separated by the newspaper. He's suddenly grown very, very cold.
People will think
what I tell them to think.
But the thing is, funnily enough, he's reading his own company while the wife is reading the Chronicle, which is very funny. As well. So they're separated by a newspaper, have a really, really long table, and also Kane is just colder and colder and colder.
Back at the hospital, Leland has this thing where he says that
That's all he really wanted out of life was love. That's Charlie's story, how he lost it. You see, he just didn't have any to give. Well, he loved Charlie Kane, of course, very dearly. His mother, I guess he always loved her.
That leads over to talk about second wife.
Yes, but so basically, yeah, that ended with divorce, basically, because they just wouldn't get along. So yeah, as we were saying, we get to Kane meeting his second wife on the wet sidewalk. She's giggling at Kane getting splashed with mud from the cars passing by. She then invites him into her home to clean his suit off. There's a good shot of the camera walking through the door just as it's reopened, which is really cool.
And she's got a toothache or something?
Yes, but that doesn't really do too much for the scene as well, so it's just sort of something random.
She doesn't know who he is. She doesn't know that he's the most wealthiest man in America.
Yeah, so they're just absolutely amusing each other to distract Susan from the toothache, with shadow puppets, and I think that's one of the only things shown, though, but Kane reveals that he was going to a Manhattan warehouse to find his hold-up childhood belongings, actually, so that's where he was about to go. She also reveals to Kane that she wanted to be a singer, and her mom wanted to be an opera singer specifically, but she wasn't cut out for it. She's not even really cut out for it at all. So he proposes, that she sing and play piano in the parlor for him. to hear what her voice is like. Because he's like, nonsense. You're not a bad singer. Show me what you got. And it's pretty nice. It's pretty admirable. She could probably, like, I don't know, do some things, but it's like, she's pretty good, but not opera singer good. And that's as we'll see through the course of the movie. So he's clapping at her performance, but transitioning via clapping, Kane is campaigning for governor. He's announced as the fighting liberal, before using this statement to then transition to the famous scene where Kane is standing behind a huge poster of himself as he's making a speech to thousands. His plan is to rid the world of Boss Jim Geddes.
And that's based off of a real guy, too, Tammany, from Tammany Hall.
But he has the ultimate confidence of his election, and all the people love him.
Yes, and but here's the question: I don't think he's divorced from Emily Kane yet. That's why there's a.
But it does end in divorce. That's what I was saying.
Oh yeah. But he's still married even while he's.
Yeah, his wife and son are watching as the speech is going on.
And the effects are really cool too, about how they make it look like there's thousands of people.
We also get a clip of him, being all for the working class and, being that citizen in the Citizen Kane.
The working man, and the slum child know they can expect my best efforts in their interests. The decent, ordinary citizens know that I'll do everything in my power to protect the underprivileged, the underpaid, and the underfed.
Unfortunately, they drive off in a taxi after the speech. They're headed for Susan's house. See, name specifically the address. This is all after the speech, and he's just concerned. He's like, how on earth do you know the address of Susan? She's like, you know what, I'm gonna drive to this place, and you're either coming with me or not. So they all do. So Kane comes with her, as Jim Geddes is actually in the house with Susan, and they're all in the house to confess to him
that she's cheating on his wife.
Yeah, she confesses to him that she does, in fact, know him, and they do have a relationship. And so, basically, Jim Geddes is blackmailing Kane because, after all, he just made a speech about how much he wants to rid the world of him. So he's like, nope. He's forcing Kane to step down from his campaign, or else he'll, cause a controversy. And as we know, that's what happens. Kane is yelling down the stairs,
I'm Charles Foster Kane! I'm no cheap, crooked politician trying to save himself from the consequences of his crimes! Geddes! I'm going to send you to Sing Sing! Sing Sing, Geddes! Sing Sing!
As Jim Geddes is just walking away. It's a very dramatic scene.
And also, the interesting thing is Wells gave himself over to this scene so much in his acting that he hurt his ankle. Or his leg or something, broke his leg or something.
It's a very dramatic scene, because this is the turning point for Kane.
Well, he directed from a wheelchair, is what I was trying to say.
That's interesting, yes, indeed. But it's a turning point for this movie, as the controversy is out in the news. The Inquirer posting fraud at polls, while defeatedly pulling down their campaign banners and decorations. That's all they could do. They were just like...
This happened to Hearst, too. With Marion Davies.
Everyone else was at, controversy and stuff, while he either had, fraud at polls or I won. So he had to put fraud at polls, which is sort of funny but sad because he lies with his newspaper, which is something that, again, Hearst does. So drunk Leland then accuses Kane about owning the people.
To me, you talk about the people as though you own them, so they belong to you. As long as I can remember, you've talked about giving the people their rights, as if you could make them a present of liberty, as a reward for services rendered.
Jed.
Remember the working man?
I'll get drunk too, Jedediah. It'll do any good.
That won't do any good. Besides, you never get drunk. You used to write an awful lot about the working man.
Oh, go on home.
He's turning into something called organized labor. You're not going to like that one little bit when you find out it means that your working man expects something as his right, not as your gift.
He also says that he'll sail to a desert island and lord over the monkeys.
I love it. I love that line, yeah. Which is kind of funny because of what
Yeah, where have we seen monkeys before?
Xanadu.
Exactly. So basically, he is lording over a desert island and lording over the monkeys, which is very, very interesting. That's why the monkeys were there.
I would also like to point out one other thing, about the quote-unquote pleasure palace that Xanadu is based after is San Simeon. There's actually a line where somebody said that they were driving up to San Simeon, and they were driving for like 30 minutes before they actually reached San Simeon. And it was because it's almost like it is a desert island. I mean, it's not a desert, but it's like in the middle of nowhere. It's very, very isolated, I guess is the word I'm saying.
Yeah, who knows? Actually, an interesting thing is you said San Simeon.
Yes.
But I also get, that there's an actual castle called Hearst Castle, which I thought was his castle, and you're like San Simeon, so that sort of confused me. So it's Hearst Castle, known formerly as La Cuesta and Cantata. So I'm like, well, does he have two castles?
No, I don't know, but San Simeon is the official name of the whole area. From the zoo to everything else. The castle is called Hearst Castle. Hearst Castle. Yeah.
Thank you for that information. So,
no problem.
But since Kane is very obstinate sort of on this matter, he gives a toast to...
Toast, Jedediah, to love on my terms. Those are the only terms anybody ever knows. His own.
Just for... Boom. Kane marries singer.
Quote singer.
Marries quote singer, as he is then
That's
marrying...
Burn. That's such a burn.
He has divorced his first wife, and now Susan Alexander is his wife. Kane is also going to have Susan become an opera star. That's his plan for this. A funny moment happens where he says building an opera house wouldn't be necessary at all, before there's a title card of Kane Builds Opera House.
Wow. Well, also another thing too, this Susan Alexander's is based off of Hearst's relationship with Marion Davies, but the thing is, Marion Davies actually is talented. She actually, she's not a singer, she's an actress, and she actually does have talent.
But Susan Alexander has some fine singing, definitely. It's her accent sort of gets in the way, but it's very fine singing.
Just ask her singing coach, okay?
Ask her singing coach. So she's getting a costume put on while being yelled at her Italian music coach. There's a big zoom out of everyone getting her ready for the show. So it's a very chaotic scene played out very fast. Everyone's getting ready for the show in the opera. So the curtain rises, and so does the camera. As you said before, they had to transition to a miniature to make this extended, very cool, pan-up shot of the guys, holding their noses and saying it was a stinker.
Yeah, and it's very cool.
So Kane arrives at the Inquirer while the staff tell him about their enthusiastic review of her terrible performance. But the review isn't ready yet because Leland fell asleep drunk writing the last part. So basically, Kane decides to finish Leland's review for him, and since Leland hadn't written too positively at this moment, he used this review to angrily trash his wife's very existence, basically.
Leland says that Susan is a pretty but hopelessly incompetent amateur.
Yeah, there wasn't very too much, mean at that point, but he just absolutely trashes her in this.
Oh, yeah.
He also fires Leland as well, basically. So this is where Leland finishes his story, because he has to go. The reporter then goes to interview Susan herself about that fateful day in the opera.
My voice. What do you suppose he built that opera house for? I didn't want it. I didn't want to sing. It was his idea. Everything was his idea. Except my leaving him.
So Kane comes in the room as the Italian tutor is attempting to perfect her singing, like a couple days before the performance, probably, and trying to bring it out of her nose. To where she's singing, very operatically.
She's nasal. He's trying to say she's singing very nasally, and you have to sing with your throat, not with your nose.
Yeah, this guy has literally no faith in her, really. But Kane is obstinate to continue the lesson regardless. So now we get onto the repeated shot of her getting ready for the opera. It has some slight variation. But it's showing that we were still overlapping to where we previously were. But it was from the opposite side of the stage, actually, I think, and it was extended into the actual performance. So we see the actual performance in this scene, and Kane is just watching sternly while everyone else is falling asleep. I think there's a guy shredding the newspaper.
That's Leland.
Yeah, basically, she wasn't made for opera. They are falling asleep for this.
But just look at the sadness in her eyes as she's trying to be on key and she knows she's not.
Yeah, I mean, she could probably survive plays, possibly, kind of easily. Just not opera, because, you need a very good voice for that. So the climax hits with no power, and it ends with medium clapping, sort of. There's some clapping, but
they're being polite.
Very polite.
We gotta clap anyway.
But Kane, he stands up, he claps very hard. He's fuming.
It gets parried and memed a lot.
Very famous clapping scene. He's just like, I don't understand why she's not good. She is good. And he's just like a furious standing ovation. And he's also fuming at the reception as well because nobody cheered, He's just like, this woman will be good. And it's just sort of an abusive relationship, as well as we'll see. Susan, next scene, is feeling betrayed at Leland's review.
Stop telling me he's your friend. Friend don't write that kind of review. All these other papers pounding me, I could expect that. But for the Inquirer to run a thing like that, spoiling my whole debut.
So Kane also opens a letter from Leland, that Leland sent him when he got fired, to see that he sent them the Declaration of Principles, all the way from previously the early part of the movie. He saved it just for the occasion.
It's kind of a burn because he's like, I'm reminding you that you've lost something.
You've lost something, definitely. But Kane, he crumples it. He calls it an antique. Susan also declares, I'm not going to sing anymore. But Kane is selfishly forcing her to do performance after performance after performance, overshadowing her in this scene, made especially noticeable for the dark shadows, which is very interesting. Then comes the montage, obviously, of her performing it 8 more times at least. There's chaotic music as it's being overlaid in a dissonant pattern, and it's just like, this is not a good thing. She is being, dragged across the floor multiple times, basically. There's also newspapers overlaid of her being absolutely terrible, and, nobody likes her.
She's getting savaged, bro.
Yes. After that, we get a very dark shot of breathing blankets, a spoon in a cup on a nightstand beside, and of Kane breaking down the door to then get Susan to a hospital as she is in bed. So yeah, this is a very abusive relationship because he's literally dragging her across the floor to the point that she literally wanted to addendum mortis, man.
Yes.
He says he can't imagine why she came to make such a foolish mistake. There's some quiet music playing as Kane is sitting in darkness, waiting for the hospital, staring at Susan's sweaty face. Fortunately, she wakes up, explains she doesn't want to sing anymore.
I couldn't make you see how I felt, Charlie. But I couldn't go through with the singing again. You don't know what it means to know that that a whole audience just doesn't want you.
That's when you've got to fight them. All right. You won't have to fight them anymore. It's their loss.
But she's like, you didn't listen, though. But he's like, what, I'll listen now. But it's honestly not enough.
No, it's too little too late, man.
We transition well into time, where Kane is much older, probably balding a little bit. Susan is putting together a puzzle in this hugely exaggerated interior of Xanadu. The fireplace roof is taller than he is, which is very exaggerated. The fireplace is usually one of the smallest things in the house, actually. So, my goodness. Anyway, Kane is very cold towards Susan. She dreams of nightclubs free in New York, but he keeps her trapped, sort of like a personal bird, kept all to himself to sing, in a lonely cage. So he's holed himself up in his aloof dreariness, and he's forcing Susan to do the same. We transition many other years, with a puzzle montage of her doing puzzle after puzzle after puzzle, until Kane is very elderly.
That's a Marion Davies thing. She loved puzzles.
Yes, but this is not to great effect, though. So Kane, he's very elderly, he's white and balding. As we were saying, the makeup is impressive. Because this dude goes from a young dude, he's still a young dude, all the way to like, I don't know, 65, 75, 85. My goodness. Really old.
And it was done by a journeyman. This is like somebody who's just training to do the effects.
That's one of the things you could say this was absolutely fantastic for the film, the makeup. It's very underappreciated, but this dude goes from being very young to very old.
It was underappreciated because a journeyman, by the law of the acting
doesn't get
world,
credited.
No, but he did credit him. Orson Welles said like I said earlier in the podcast, he said he wanted to thank everybody, including the greatest makeup man in the world, and Seidelman.
Yeah. So we get to the point where Kane is elderly. As I said, he says they're having a picnic. No one is to tell him no. So there's a line of limousines where guests are dancing to a black band.
Jazz band. He can get any band he wants.
Yeah, sort of jazzy. So there's people dancing at this picnic to the music and stuff, and they're sort of camped out somewhere.
They're in the Everglades.
They're in the Everglades of Florida, yes.
And they have a pig roasting on a spit.
Yes, they do. But remember when I said, all the way in the Son of Kong episode, that the island mat they had, with the pterodactyls going across, ended up in this movie?
Yeah.
Notice the animated pterodactyls in this shot. It's this mat of the picnic.
Yep.
Where you can see flying pterodactyls in the background. It's sort of funny, though. You're just like, oh, I didn't know they're pterodactyls now. But it was because they reused the mat, so...
Yep, you heard it. I mean, Citizen Kane and King Kong are in the same metaverse.
Citizen Kong.
Citizen Kong.
So, anyway, we then get into a tent as Susan is confronting Kane on his trying to make her happy so that he could be happy.
Whatever I do because I love you.
You don't love me. You want me to love you. Sure. I'm Charles Foster Kane. Whatever you want, just name it and it's yours. But you gotta love me.
Kane then, at this statement, smacks her. This is absolutely an abusive relationship. At the same time, a woman in the background starts wailing after this, and a band stops for, I don't know if this is a related or unrelated reason, but it also, since the music stops and there's wailing, it shows that there is a dramatic shift. This guy is just cold. He even slaps his own wife, man. So we then cut back all the way to Xanadu, where Kane is attempting in vain to stop Susan from packing up and leaving. He promises to stop giving what he thinks other people want, instead of what they actually want. He's like, no, I'll be good this time, for reals. But she reveals that he's still acting selfishly from this statement, because he still wants her to love him, before leaving through several doors. So now that Susan has finished her story by saying that it didn't really matter to me actually at all, I just lost all my money, she's just like, it didn't really matter at all I left this rich dude. I just, lost all the money, but there was not very much loss. So the reporter then goes to Xanadu for the news people to catalog all that Kane owned in this place with pictures and lists before junking it or putting it in a museum. So at Xanadu, the final interview is with Raymond the butler, who is sure he knows what Rosebud is.
Rosebud? I tell you about Rosebud. How much is it worth to you? $1,000? Rosebud? Yes. Well, like I tell you, the old man acted kind of funny sometimes, but I know how to handle him. Like the time his wife left.
Then comes the infamous bird. In his transition to his reveal, they put the bird in to make sure that people wouldn't fall asleep, or if they were fall asleep, to wake them up. It definitely jump scared me. So, who knows, maybe your bilingual girlfriend also got jump scared as well. The butler, he then sees Kane finally turn around right after her leaving, and proceed to trash her room that he was just in. Before stopping himself and throwing the snow globe. This is a very dramatic moment. He's just a long take of him just absolutely trashing the place. I think there were 4 takes, actually. But he went hard in this moment, Orson Welles did. He buried himself in this character, and he's just chucking everything, tearing everything down. It's very dramatic.
He cut his hand in this scene.
He cut his hand in this scene.
And actually, later on, any scenes that he's in, that they filmed him, when he was an old man. His other hand is hidden.
He then looks at the snow globe.
Rosebud.
He says, before walking between the concerned maids and butlers out of this room. Also by an infinite mirror-looking thing, caused due to reflecting back at itself.
It's an amazing shot.
It's an amazing shot showing all of his selves. It can be interpreted as all of his possible selves in the timeline all converging, or like something like that. There's many interpretations.
It's a multiverse of his own madness.
What do you know about the multiverse?
Exactly. The butler supposes that Rosebud is the snow globe, since he said Rosebud right after the snow globe while looking at the snow globe. That's close, but not exactly it is, we'll tell. The people, they're cataloging among a sea of statues and memorabilia. It sort of be looking like the Indiana Jones final scene with all of the crates and stuff. That's a good comparison.
It's an amazing shot if you think about it,
We also have this sort of pan shot where they're examining this stuff. They note that they see the trophy from Kane's welcoming party all the way back that he didn't accept in order to get married with his first wife. Also, the $2 stove his mom had. Absolute poverty, as revealed. So they also have no concern over whatever it meant. They just cataloged it. And it seems that Rosebud wasn't found by the people while they've cataloged everything, and they're like, well, we didn't find what Rosebud actually meant. The reporter also gives a final line about this being a jigsaw puzzle, that you can never really sum up a man in a jigsaw.
What have you been doing all this time?
Playing with a jigsaw puzzle?
If you could have found out what that Rosebud meant, I bet that would have explained everything.
No, I don't think so. No. Mr. Kane was a man who got everything he wanted and then lost it. Maybe Rosebud was something he couldn't get or something he lost. Anyway, it wouldn't have explained anything. I don't think any word can explain a man's life. No, I guess Rosebud is just a piece in a jigsaw puzzle. A missing piece.
And as they leave, we get to this final scene. It's also very famous. A big slow pan over all the boxes that was his entire life. All his life. All the boxes.
The loot of the world.
The loot of the world. Nearly stopping at the back of the room. This is a very epic shot, by the way. It's very epic. There's just epic music, epic shot. It hits you hard in this emotional moment when a man at the end of this room, there's an incinerator. He takes a sled that we see from the near end of the shot, and at the command of throw that junk in, he throws it into the incinerator, and it burns the sled. And as we see in this close-up shot of it burning, the word Rosebud is on this sled as slush is evaporating off of it, and the name chars into ash. And a billowing black cloud escapes the top of Xanadu as the beginning first shot of the whole movie, with the no trespassing sign and the different shots of Xanadu, all play in reverse, to the point where it goes back into the ground. And then we get the end placard. So, this is where we then reveal that the Kane's life, his childhood, was the Rosebud that they never discovered. But we discovered it because we, as the camera, closed in. This is something that is mind-blowing, definitely, for the era. Because it's like, they didn't discover something. We did. They didn't know what his life meant, and they all burned all of his stuff until he has no record of his existence at all.
And the thing about this, the things that were burned, they're now up in smoke. They're just as good. They're like ghosts.
It's billowing black smoke out of the chimney.
And it'll just, like I said, his life is a ghost.
So what did you think of this movie overall?
Are you
all
kidding?
Of the story elements.
Well, okay. I would say the story is interesting, and I like to watch an actor really in his craft doing a great job. That's what I like. I like the drama, and I like all that stuff, and that's good. The story is really good.
It was fantastically told as well.
Yeah, yes, but the thing that kind of, it's the way that the story was told. Somebody once said there's no new stories, but it's the fact that you're telling them that can make them different,
the fact that Orson Welles is telling that makes an entirely different style, and it also, I got very emotionally hooked on this movie as well, because you can see his rise and all of stuff, but also his downfall as well, which hits very hard to the point where he's just cold man, abusive man.
It's visually interesting to watch too, because, and I'd have to say it's Orson Welles, his acting in that, the writing, yes, but if you turn off the sound, just turn off the sound, and I know the music is really good too, but if you turn off the sound, the visuals are captivating, and that's Toland, and that's Robert Wise editing it, and that's Orson Welles' vision, and honestly, that's what makes this movie.
It definitely is. So if it's not the greatest movie of all time to you, it's definitely very much up there. It is probably within at least the top five listing.
And I don't, like I said, early in the podcast, I don't like saying a movie is the greatest of all time. It's very difficult. It's difficult to pick that.
Because there are many regions, many directors, many, cinematographers, all of which with a different style and ways of doing things.
This is one of the greats.
One of the greats, top 5 movies.
Yeah, and honestly, the story, I was fascinated not only by the movie, but the story behind the making of it was equally fascinating.
And also the innovation that it was, because this summing up all of the things and all of the things before, some of the techniques and the deep focus, whatever, summing it all up into one movie and perfecting it and polishing it to the greatest that it can be. It made a mark for the 1940s, and the 1940s had this sort of probably radical shift, because it's like this stuff started becoming the norm, and then we'd eventually, get to the 1950s and whatever, and it's just like, it's a different style overall in the 1940s, but it's just all of this big growth, and Citizen Kane is a big stepping point in this growth.
Yes. I will tell you, though, I can watch Citizen Kane a couple of times, but the movie that we're going to do next, I can watch that multiple times and still enjoy every minute of it. And it's not...
If you watch Citizen Kane...
It's not a masterpiece.
Yes. If you watch Citizen Kane multiple times, you can still tell that there's mastery, and you can still tell that it's a very well-told story, and you can still tell that the cinematography is way different than its time, and much, much better, and much more of a vision that he had, which still makes this mark today.
The movie we're watching next is the Treasure of the Sierra Madre,
and we're gonna have a bunch of fun with that one.
Yeah, we're gonna have a ball. I honestly, I like the characters, and I like the character acting, and I'm sure you're gonna really like the story. If you're not familiar with this movie, you should be, because it's really fun to watch. There's not that many characters, but the way that they interact and play off each other, it's chef's kiss, in my opinion. So we're doing some really great movies here. I mean, come on, Em.
But that was our Citizen Kane review.
It's
not going to be like most other Citizen Kane reviews, because there's literally tons of them, and this is very much studied in film school, so we're probably one of a bunch of them. So if you saw ours and you sort of liked it, definitely check out others. They might be better, they might be cool, Sorry.
So, okay, I have something that I've been wanting to ask you. As we end the podcast, I want you to say something as if you're dying, random, where if someone heard it standing outside your room as you're an old man, they would be like, what was that from? So what's your version of Rosebud? What would your last word be that people would puzzle over, and it's just something really from your past?
Bob the Builder. Can he do it? Bob the Builder. Can he fix it?
Bob. Something like that, right?
I don't know. Can Bob the Builder fix it?
I would say something like serendipity. I don't know, just something really vague and strange and mysterious.
Anti-disestablishmentarianism.
Totalitarian. Yeah. An electroencephalograph.
Deoxyribonucleic acid.
Yes. So,
we'll see you next time.
We will. We'll see you next time. And have a good one. And check this movie out.
And be a citizen.
It's a great one. Be a good citizen and see this movie. Bye now. Don't forget to open your third eye and telepathically message us at cinefanpod@gmail.com. Set your chronoscope dial to the future setting and peruse cinematicfanpodcast.wordpress.com. Hunker over your ham radio as your keen ears listen for the ghostly voices tweeting on our Twitter @CinematicFanta1. Exchange all of your money into Republic credits and donate at our Patreon page at patreon.com/cinefanpodcast. Ending transmission now.